I was born in Nigeria, but I grew up in England. And I'd spend my summer holidays in Nigeria. Around 1990, we stopped going because of my father's campaign. He was extremely dedicated to the cause, fighting environmental degradation in the Niger Delta. It became quite all-consuming after a while. And then he was killed when I was 19, and so for a long time I didn't really engage with Nigeria.
On behalf of the entire Ogoni land, its chiefs, people and spirits, and on behalf of the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, first up, I say, welcome to our shell-shocked land.
But she can. November 1995. We remember. Truth persists and continues to spread. You can kill the messenger, but she can never kill the message. This is the story of what happens when people fight oil giants. This is the story of Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 9.
He loved Ogoni, and he loved Nigeria. You know, it wasn't just our ethnic group that he wanted to improve, it was everyone. With the oil industry in Nigeria, there's always been prioritizing of profit over people. They have a certain power over the government. An oil company is producing government revenue, and so the government, to some extent, is going to allow those companies to do what they want.
The Niger Delta, Africa's largest delta. Rivers, swamps, mangroves. Rich in oil reserve, it underpins Nigerians' economy. In 1958, Shell began extracting oil from Ogoni land. Shell's operation devastated Ogoni, polluting rivers, farmland, and drinking water. The Ogoni people opposed Shell's operation, blaming them for severe pollution and environmental destruction.
From today onwards, Shell is declared persona non grata in Ogoni.
Declaring Shell unwelcome, they faced violent repression by Nigeria's military regime. Thousands were later murdered or tortured, with evidence later emerging that Shell colluded with the military regime. The Ogoni were activists, with Ken the head of the movement for the survival of Ogoni people. Ken Saro-Wiwa, Saturday Dobe, Nodu Ewo, Daniel Boko, Paul Lebura, Felix Nuate, Baribo Bira, Barinim Kyobe, John Oine. The Ogoni demanded environmental cleanup and political autonomy, challenging both the Nigerian government and corporate exploitation. But chicanery in solidarity spread in the US and London.
So in 1993, Andy Rowell, who is still with Oil Change International, he called me up and he said, you have to meet this gentleman from Nigeria. His name is Ken Saro-Wiwa, and he's been organizing in his community in Nigeria to non-violently push the oil industry out of his backyard.
In May 1994, 4 Ogoni chiefs were murdered in the grain conflicts. The government accused Ken and his colleagues of orchestrating the killings, although evidence later emerged that the military was behind the murders. Ken and others were imprisoned. Despite repeated torture, they remained steadfast in the faith and conviction in the justice of the cause. Their incarceration became a testimony for social and environmental justice. Ken wrote, When the land is ravaged, our pure air poised, when streams choke with pollution, silence would be treason. Amnesty International and others documented severe abuses against those imprisoned. They were locked up, beaten, and denied medical treatment. On November 10, 1995, Ken and 8 fellow activists were executed for leading the Ogoni people's fight against Shell and the government-backed oil exploration. The Ogoni 9 execution became a defining moment in the global fight for environmental and human rights.
And that moment, that realization of what the oil industry is willing to do to protect its profits, was pivotal for me personally and pivotal for a lot of us. This is not an acceptable cost for energy or an acceptable way to make profit. The idea that eventually became Oil Change International was born.
That we must pass legislation to prohibit any new investment, to freeze the assets of the...
Ken Saro-Wiwa would be alive if we never had oil. The reason for killing Ken was that the next morning oil will begin to flow, and to teach other Niger Delta communities how dangerous it is to talk about oil, the heartbeat of Nigerian economy.
Before the execution of our leaders, the military had gone around, Ogoni, silencing anybody. Several others who made an attempt, to show protest were locked up.
In 1995,
A 2011 UN report found Shell's maintenance inadequate, with catastrophic effects on the environment and people's health.
The oil has stripped that delta. What you see now, it's pollution that is at unimaginable scales. The climate crisis we're in has been caused by the banning of fossil fuels. The irony actually is how Nigeria is one of the biggest oil producers in the continent, but it imports oil for its economic activities. At the extraction sites, there are pipelines, and the pipelines lead to exit points that are taking the crude oil to the north. The north processes the oil and then sells it back at a higher cost. It's not a development mechanism. It's a mechanism that's meant to generate profit. One would have thought that the story of the Ogoni 9 would embarrass business, the oil industry, to do things better, but they haven't.
Ken Saro-Wiwa Jr.
It falls on me to read the acceptance speech which my father managed to smuggle out of his detention cell. Unfortunately, in Africa, Shell and many a Western multinational company have failed to apply the environmental principle of best practice, using their financial muscle and the political power they exercise over African governments. They are wont to blackmail, terrorize, and silence those who have not the temerity to question their environmental records. This is not acceptable. As I write, I stand trial for my life before a special military tribunal.
My first memory of Ken Saro-Wiwa is we met on a number of occasions in London. At that time, Ogoni was a place that no one had heard of. Shell was operating with impunity in the Niger Delta. When the Ogoni and Ken started protesting, Shell saw this as a public relations problem. They've never tried to engage with the Ogoni. They've always dragged their heels in court. They've always denied everything in the press. For them, it's business as usual. They have a legal duty to their shareholders to maximise profit.
30 years later, this is still a struggle. The Ogoni people still live in poverty, and Shell left with a legacy of pollution. In March 2025, Shell sold its Nigerian onshore subsidiary in a move seen by critics as avoiding liability and cleanup. Shell's remaining interest in Nigeria focused on deep water and integrated gas operations. Communities are still fighting back. Nigerian residents of two communities of the Niger Delta are suing Shell and its subsidiary, but the company denies liability. In June 2025, the Nigerian government pardoned the Ogoni 9. It falls far short of real justice.
When I heard about the pardoning of the Ogoni 9, I felt it was a step forward. I was glad to see a government take steps in that direction. But the language is very important, and when you pardon someone, it implies that they've committed a crime in the first place. And the Ogoni 9 were completely innocent. Exoneration is what we want, ultimately.
Today, MOSOP, which is the Movement of the Survival of the Ogoni people, is asking for three basic things. They want full exoneration for the Ogoni 9, they want compensation, and they want cleanup that is done to international standards.
Shell has blatantly ignored its responsibility to clean up pollution, flouting international standards. Shell's attempt to avoid its responsibility to clean up and pay up is now seen as having international ramifications. Despite this devastation, the Nigerian government has signaled plans to resume oil exploration in Ogoni land.
It's really very shocking that anyone would think of reopening the oil well at a time when the efforts to clean up Ogoni has not been completed.
Nigeria share be of right. So we back na go no di be baba bo Kenya bo yi ko mari abe te do bari di fa simu baba do mu
e be fenda te bo ba every month the whole family first baba na na bolo e be rakara tu be la ne scholarship be la ne tu be roton be na ba be di jan di ko ni be na ba di jan
Oil Change has been running a campaign called Protect the Deltas. What we're calling for is an end to oil exploration, community-led renewable development. Africa has amazing renewable resources. It could be completely self-reliant in energy.
We have so many resources. The rest of the world knows this. The rest of the world has exploited us for so long. I would love to have this African Renaissance. And the foundation for all of that is education. Once you have that, then you can do anything.
But we live in unnatural times, and we must make it natural again with our singing and our intelligent rage. Remembering is a fundamentally important act of resistance.
The struggle of humanity against power is the struggle of humanity against forgetting. We remember. Long live Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 9.